So this morning we have a 2006 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and they have a laundry list of complaints. Cutting out, stalling, low idle, irregular idle, engine light is on, ABS light is on, StabiliTrak, ESP message, stalling, problems with power windows and air conditioning as well. I'm hoping that a majority of the check engine light problems are related. I'm going to set the scanner up here and take it for a road test and see what happens. They're also complaining about transmission shifting harsh up and down as well. So looking at the vehicle history, this vehicle was here before, let's see, what date was this? About a year ago. No, actually April of 2017, and they had complained about the MIL, intermittent lack of power, ESP light, BAS lights come on at times, but it also had an evap problem. Couldn't find anything back then for this ESP and BAS lights on, just the evap large leak, and I changed the leak detection pump on it. So we're going to scan it right now and see what codes, if any, are in the computers. Hopefully there'll be something to give us some direction. I drove it in the shop just now and it stalled, sitting there idling, and just quit, like it shut off, like it lost crank signal or something. And then of course just now it restarted and it's idling perfectly fine. So we're going to do a network code scan on it. We auto ID'd the vehicle. Let's do a network code scan and see what comes up. This will take a couple minutes, so I'll pick up when we get to the end. So here are the fault codes retrieved. P0068 manifold pressure throttle position correlation. P0123 TPS APP circuit high. And transmission over temperature. They did mention that there was a message coming up on the dash occasionally for transmission over temperature. And again, TPS APP circuit high. And the anti-lock brake system has an implausible data received from the ECM PCM. So I suspect the BAS and ESP lights are on because of the engine codes related to TPS and the accelerator pedal. Final drive control module, implausible data, rear audio speaker, tire pressure sensor. So we're going to have a look and see what freeze frame data is stored. I've got a recording of this. Let's have a look at freeze frame data. That'll be in the engine. Use your phone. Well, this freeze frame data for the map to map correlation is not really helpful. The only thing that stands out here is the absolute throttle position of 52.9% and relative position of 29%. Otherwise, it's pretty much useless. I don't see anything else that looks out of the ordinary. Fuel trims are normal. There's not much available in this data list. It doesn't tell me how long it was running. It does tell me vehicle speed was 34 miles an hour and absolute load was 14%. So we're going to clear all the codes out of this thing and have a look at some other information. So here is the code tip from a Snap-on troubleshooter for the P0068 manifold pressure throttle position correlation. It says if the code sets if the vacuum drops below 1.5 inches with the engine RPM greater than 2,000 in closed throttle. One trip fault, so it fails the first time. 3 good trips to turn the MIL off. Vacuum leak, restricted air intake, resistance in the map signal circuit. Apparently the map sensor has been replaced. Map signal circuit shorted to ground. Resistance in the 5-volt supply circuit. 5-volt supply circuit shorted to ground. Resistance in the TP sensor number 1 signal circuit, or number 1 signal circuit shorted to ground. Resistance in the ground circuit, the map sensor, throttle position sensor, or a faulty PCM. Let's have a look at the P0123 code. P01 23. Let's see what that one is. Code sets when the throttle position sensor voltage at the PCM is greater than 4.47 volts for 1.3 seconds. Possible causes. I just visually checked the transmission fluid and it looks beautiful. There's no smell of burnt fluid and no signs of overheating. And the fluid is a nice light pink color, so I don't think it's actually got a transmission overheating condition. Let's have a look at this electrical diagram. So it's always wise to check for TSBs fairly early in any diagnostic like this in case there's already a posted bulletin on it. I don't see anything related to P0068. Here's one case on Identifix. Lots of TPS problems, lots of map sensor problems. We're going to have a look at that, but I'm going to also search for the other codes as well. 1, 2, 3. Let's try that one. P0123, that's the TPS APP correlation code. It says there's 2 TSBs on that. Monitor, radio communication equipment. Oh, here we go. Flash memory steering column, engine cylinder misfire, ignition coil malfunction. Let's read this one. See if there's any relationship here. Oh, that's just a generic code, generic information, but there was another one there. I went back too far. This one here. So here's a wiring diagram that shows the map sensor into the PCM. There's the signal from the map sensor on K1, but it also shares 5-volt supply with the EGR valve. I've had EGR valves on these Chrysler products short out and take down the 5-volt reference. It shares a 5-volt supply with the cam sensor and looks like other components too. Shares the ground with the cam sensor and the line pressure sensor. Let's check to see where this goes. Oh, I'm going to have to back off. I have to look and see what I'm looking for here. 2 connector 104. So sometimes I like looking at the Mitchell versions of these diagrams because they're more condensed and less pages. Here's the cam sensor. It shares a power and ground with the crank sensor, and it also shares with the ground with the intake air temp sensor. Now we have to go on this next page here to see where the rest of these pink yellow wire is a 5-volt reference, and dark blue and green is the ground signals. So let's go to the next diagram. Just trying to see if there's any. Here's this pink yellow. Highlight that one, that goes straight across the page to the next diagram, and dark blue and green is a ground. Coolant temp sensor shares that ground. Here's a bunch more, dark blue and green. These are all grounds for various other sensors. Let's continue to the next diagram to see what else is on that 5-volt reference. So the map sensor and the cam sensor share a 5-volt reference, which is right here, but it's different reference voltage from the crank sensor. So that goes on the next page to location 13 and 4. So we'll go down to the next diagram, and this is 4. And that goes to the 5-volt supply to the EGR valve, and 13 is our 5-volt supply to the map sensor. As I said, I've had EGR valves on Chrysler products short out and take down the 5-volt reference. They're very unlikely to set an EGR fault code because the criteria for setting the code it has to be out of range longer, but the map sensor is much more sensitive, and so is the TPS. But the TPS doesn't share that 5-volt reference, so much for that. But it could be taking down the map sensor voltage, showing a low voltage on the map sensor, and then the TPS is being construed as being out of range. So doing a visual inspection of obvious wiring problems, because sometimes rodents get in here and chew on the wires. This is the map sensor down in here, 3 wires to it, and the EGR position sensor is back there. EGR valve and position sensor. Let's see if I can get this light to stay here. Not really. And the TPS is right up on top here, right here. This is TPS, and the EGR valve is back there. Unfortunately, it's not doing it right now. Let's scope the TPS at least. See if we can see any dropouts in the TPS. So I'm back pinning the TPS voltage wire, which is the middle wire on the TPS. I got the key on, I got a battery charger hooked up to it, a clean battery charger, and this is a TPS voltage. Now, there's no reason why it should be doing that. It's okay up here, but at rest it should be about 0.5 to 1 volt. And it's jumping all over the place. Let's check the 5-volt reference here, which I think is this one right here. Make sure that that's consistent. And it is 4.99 volts. And let's check the ground. 0.02. Let's go back on that wire, make sure it wasn't a connection issue. Come on, slide in there. Maybe it was a connection issue. Maybe I wasn't making a connection. Or did it fix itself? No, there it goes again. I'm doing a sweep, and it should rise nice and smooth, and it's not. So this thing needs a throttle position sensor. Wow. All that. Well, let's hope that corrects this transmission issue, and well, that would explain if it randomly drops out. Here's a sweep again, gradually opening the throttle, and it's jumping all over the place. Now this is a map censored vehicle, a speed density vehicle, so it's very sensitive to TPS voltage changes. Okay, let's get a throttle position sensor sent out. So there are 2 T25 screws that hold the TPS on. Changed it now, key on. Sitting at 0.56 volts. And you can see when I sweep the throttle, it's nice and smooth. That little jerkiness at the beginning was me. So, let's see if that corrects the TPS map correlation code, but that shouldn't affect the transmission over temperature. So we might be dealing with 2 problems yet. We'll have to watch what goes on with the tranny temp. So I'm going to go back in now and clear all the codes from all the controllers in this thing. Key on, engine off. As I said, I got a clean battery charger hooked up to it, so the battery won't go flat while I'm working on it. I can keep the key on. I know I would have generated a TPS code by unplugging it with the key on, and I would have generated a intake air temp sensor code by unplugging that because I had the air induction system off. So we're doing network code clear. I'm going to check that P0218 trans over temperature code again and see if there's any cases on it. He also said the AC is not working and the power windows are malfunctioning. I don't remember which ones. Okay. Let's go into the engine controls and look at data and see what the TPS voltage shows right now. It should be about 0.56. 0.5 calculated voltage, TPS minimum voltage. Now that should, I bet you that needs to be relearned, because that shouldn't be that high. And this memory resets, there we go. You would think clearing the codes would do that. Let's do an all adaptive memory reset. Let's go back and check that TPS voltage again. Now the minimum TPS is 1.2. Maybe that's going to update when we start it. Let's start it up and see how it runs. So I'm looking at some cases for this P0218 transmission temperature, and this one case here suggests to verify the fluid level and condition, which I have. Now when I did start it a few minutes ago, it was 90 degrees Fahrenheit already, and I'd only ran it like 100 feet into the shop, and it had been sitting here idling, and typically the transmission doesn't get warm sitting idling. Road test the vehicle to determine if the transmission is slipping or if there are any fault codes generated. Check transmission temperature using a scan tool. And maybe we're going to shoot it with an infrared thermometer and see if the transmission temperature shows reasonably close, because it could have a skewed transmission temp sensor inside the transmission. So that's fairly common. I don't like this replace powertrain control module. We're not going to do that. So we'll go back to the data here. Let's go back out of here. I was playing with the windows. Let's go into the transmission and look at transmission temperature, key on, engine off. Let's see, it's transmission temperature. Oil temperature negative 2.8 Fahrenheit. How is that possible? It was just showing 90 Fahrenheit a few minutes ago, and now it shows negative 2.8. How can you have negative 2.8? I guess. You would think that would be transmission temperature hot. True. Too bad it doesn't give you the transmission oil temperature as a voltage. So it's showing hot, but this doesn't look realistic here. Wonder if we can measure that voltage on a wire going into the ECU. So according to the infrared thermometer on the side of the transmission pan, it's about 106 Fahrenheit, and this is showing 115, but it's right inside the transmission, so I don't think it's that far off. But a few minutes ago it was like negative something. Mind you, that was key on, engine off. Let's see what happens when I turn the key on, engine off. Well, isn't that special? Key on, engine off, transmission oil temperature is negative 2.8 Fahrenheit. How is that possible? And let me start it and see what it does when I start it. It just started and stalled all by itself. And it's now 117 Fahrenheit. I did not shut it off, it stalled. And now it won't start. Wasn't that special? Let's save this data list. And exit out of here, and let's go into the ECM and see if we have any codes. Invalid skim key. Boy, this thing is just full of surprises today. That wasn't there before. I never took the key out of the ignition. I'm using the same key. So I took this key out of the ignition, looked at it. It's an aftermarket key, it says made in Italy. Turned it over, put it back in the ignition, and now it starts, but now I can't shut it off. I can turn it to crank, but it won't crank, and now it won't shut off. I'm afraid to break it. I can't, this must be a spare key that they're using or something, because, damn. It was hard to turn before. There. This is what we've got. KL Italy. This is not an OEM key, obviously, and it's very difficult to turn. Look at, I can't turn it. So it turns out there is a data parameter for a transmission temperature sensor voltage, and the transmission oil temperature is just listed under T for transmission, and the other one's listed under O for oil temperature. So I'm going to take it for a road test now and see how it runs. The reason why it quit there, it started and quit, was because of the anti-theft system in this key. So I don't know what's going on with this key. I'm going to have to talk to the customer and find out if this is the one that they use or if this is a spare one, because it's questionable at best. So driving at about 80 kilometers, 90 kilometers an hour, and there's a steady wheel bearing noise. Sounds like the left front wheel bearing is coming apart. I'm trying to analyze whether the torque converter is locking up or not, because if its torque converter is not locking up, it'll make the transmission run hot. So I just came back from about a 10-kilometer road test at highway speeds, and aside from the wheel bearing noise from the front, transmission seems to be working fine. So here's a recording of the trans data, and the maximum temperature that it got to was 144 Fahrenheit. I'm just looking at this trans temperature sensor voltage as it goes through the shifts. This is target gear, this is current gear. This must have a range switching temp sensor in it, because you notice it was down to 0.98 volts right here, or 1 volt, and then it's jumped back up to 3.73, so it must be a range switching temperature sensor circuit where the actual oil temperature didn't change, but the voltage changes because the computer switches in another resistor. I thought I saw some dropouts. Yes, there are some dropouts in the temp sensor voltage right there a couple of times. Now that could be the temp sensor is dropping out. Let's try and blow this up a little bit. So you can see it dropped out here this one time, dropped down to 1 volt. Once it switches that temp sensor range, it's not supposed to switch back until it goes through a cool down cycle and starts over again. Do we have a faulty temp sensor in there, or is this a glitch in the software? The transmission seemed to work just fine. The fluid level and quality is perfect. Maximum temperature it got to was 144, so I'm not sure what to do with this. I'll have to look and see whether this trans temp sensor is fairly easy to service, or if we got to change the whole valve body, or if it's serviced with the solenoid body or what. I found this case on Identifix here. Monitor the voltage for the transmission temp sensor. This is a dual curve relationship. The voltage starts high and drops as the transmission warms up. At about 1.25 volts and 130 degrees Fahrenheit, the voltage should jump high again and slow come down as the transmission warms up beyond 130 degrees Fahrenheit. If the voltage continues to go down below 1 volt and the temperature on the scan tool jumps from 130 to about 258 degrees, replace the PCM. Well, it never did that. Oops, wrong one. This is what I wanted here. It never hit 258, but it did spike down to 1.02 volts. So it could be a transmission or a PCM problem. There's another spike. If I can catch that. 1 volt. Actually dropped as low as 0.98 according to the graph here, which is auto ranging. Well, I'm going to have to discuss this with the customer. There's another dropout. There's several dropouts there.